everybody. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey, the show where two writers go into the wild with their notebooks and pens and return with a novel about the horrors of forgetting bug spray. I'm your bitten head to toe host, William R. Hincy, and joining me today, I'm really delighted and honored to have with me John Lane. John, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Thank you, Bill. It's really great to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm stoked to have you. And so
I got my whiskey on the side here.
Very good. We are going to definitely get to that. I want to give you the brief introduction, and then we'll get to matters of church and state immediately here.
Okay.
So you used to teach at, I'm going to try to get this right. It was Wolford.
Close enough. Yeah.
Close enough. College. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. For college. And then I think you were teaching, what do we have? Environmental studies, and you were the director of the Goodall Center.
Yeah, I spent 20 years in the English department teaching literature and creative writing, and then I was interested in natural history, and I really wanted to get outside, and so I formed a rebellion and created an environmental studies program and moved over there.
Oh, very cool!
And taught the last 12 years in that department. I was the humanities arm of an environmental studies program.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I know there's like 20 some odd books, so I'll touch on a few, and you pipe in any of the other ones. You had Circling Home.
I've been busy.
You certainly have. We got My Paddle to the Sea, and we have Neighborhood Hawks, A Year Following Wild Birds, which I mentioned to you pre-show. I'm super excited to talk about that because I might have to write a version of that for myself at some point.
I think everybody should. Everybody can do it. It's a how-to book.
All right. Oh, very cool. Very cool. And then the one that is coming out kind of around the release of this show will be Gullies of My People, an excavation of landscape and family.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's really the closest. I write nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. And this is sort of the closest I've really veered into memoir. So that'll be kind of fun to do.
Right. Yeah. That's going to be awesome. So, but like we mentioned, it's the whiskey time. So the waters of life. So what are we drinking?
So am I supposed to show it to you?
That would be wonderful.
All right. So I'm sure you've had somebody come on with this before. This is, I'm a Southerner, but I hate bourbon. I don't drink bourbon. I never have liked it. I've got a number of reasons we could go into when we talk about Gullies of My People in a second. But I love Irish whiskey and Scotch. But I only like the really peaty Scotches. Those are the ones. I don't like those smooth Scotches that people really like. I like Lafroig, and those really, really peaty Scotches. But I'm gonna use this Irish whiskey today that probably everybody's had on here. Writer's Tears, right? How many times have you had Writer's Tears?
So I've had it a bunch. I've showed it on the show a couple times when I drank it, and it's actually there's one up on the bar here. But no one else has drank it with me, so maybe I should. I should actually, in fact, I'll grip my bottle.
I really like it. Somebody gave me a bottle a couple years ago, and I really, really, really like it. So we'll pour a little bit here. And I also have a memorial glass.
I got this one. There was this Marsala cask finish one I happened to find. I don't know if you could see that okay.
Oh, yeah.
I happen to find that's pretty nice too. But yeah, Writer's Tears is a good one.
So I also have a memorial glass, little whiskey glass. And it's a glass, a memorial glass for a mentor of mine, dear friend named John Pilley. And he was a psychology professor at Wofford. And some of your listeners might know him because he became fairly well known he died now. You see, he was 89 and died about 3 years ago. But he became fairly well known about a decade ago when he trained his border collie Chaser to know 1,000 words. And
wow.
The genius border collie Chaser. He was on 60 Minutes. He was on everything. And it was really remarkable. And Pilley was a paddler, a kayaker, and we did a lot of work, a lot of traveling together. But when he retired from Wofford, he decided he needed a project. And so he decided to teach this dog 1,200 words. So he did. So here's to John Pilley.
I've been delayed here. Let me get a glass.
Let's get a
I
little
was planning on
sip
having
here.
something else, but this is even more fun. So
here's to John Pilley. Here's to the Border Collie Chaser, and may he learn more words in the afterlife.
Amen. I know technically you're supposed to say cheers, but I mean, with the afterlife, I felt the amen was a little more appropriate there.
Salute.
So very good.
Have you ever had anybody spoil this podcast by drinking beer?
So I have had someone drink beer, but they brought whiskey too.
Okay.
So the real shame is someone did drink tea on the show once, and I mean that hurt my heart. No, that was a painful one, but
yeah,
I think it's fun to have everyone come on and share a drink and the camaraderie and everything of it. I don't like to be exclusive though, so I always give everyone if you want to drink tea or actually Daniel Cross Turner, who was anyone watching when this comes out, he would have been the October episode of the show that put us in contact. He had made a mocktail. He had said how you can make it, here's how you can make it hard, but here's a mocktail. I think it was he called it a dark and calmy. It was a dark and stormy. So yeah, so I like to have as much people as possible, but it does warm my heart, just like the whiskey warms my heart when someone drinks it with me. So bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad your heart's warm. Mine is too. And no tears.
And no tears. Yeah, that's the most important part. Your bio that I had looked up, it described you as an eco writer. So
yeah.
And would you agree with that? And if you could maybe explain what an eco writer is.
Well, I would say that my work from the beginning has always been concerned with my relationship to the natural world. And it's changed over time, obviously, as the work's changed over time that we do. I mean, I would have originally probably called myself a nature writer, but that's kind of out of vogue now. And but I would say that it has to do with that. What is my relationship to everything around me? And that makes me an eco writer, I'd say, is that really beginning to explore that relationship, those lines between me and everything, and not only the material world, but the natural and supernatural world. I mean, everything, the world we know, the world we can see, the world we move in. I've never been an urban person. I've always been a person who's lived on the edges of suburbs. And many of my books have come out of that. Books like Neighborhood Hawks. That book, that's a very recent book. It was published a few years ago. And I read a book by called The Peregrine by an English writer named J.A. Baker. Followed peregrine falcons for years, for 10 years, and then sort of condensed it into 1 year, a mythical year like Thoreau did when he was at Walden. And I read that book and I really loved it. And I said, wow, I don't have any peregrine falcons to follow, but I've got these red-shouldered hawks that live in my neighborhood and never migrate. They're always here and they're noisy as hell. So what I'm going to do is try for 1 year to follow those hawks and to make a commitment to myself that every time I hear the birds, I'll leave the house with my binoculars and go find them and observe them as much as I can, as long as I can. So that's what I did. I wrote the entire the entire book on the first draft on my phone. I would always take my phone and I'll have my binoculars and I'll hear the birds outside, and I would just go and find them, and I would stay with them as long as I could. And other things came into it, obviously, other layered parts of the narrative. I ended up getting as interested in about 300 turkey vultures that ended up roosting for the winter right down the street from our house as I was about the hawks. But I would say that's a perfect example of what I do. I love excursion narratives. I love narratives where I go out and do something. My paddle the sea. I decided there's a creek behind our house. What if I got in it and 200 miles later, I go to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's that. I did that. Follow the Hawks. Circling Home was a really popular book of mine. When we moved into this house, you can't really see it, the shadows. I'm in my study. The creek's behind me. When we moved into this house, I decided, what can I discover that's in the mile around our house? So I took a plate out and I put it on a topo map and I drew a circle. And for a year, I explored that 1 mile circle around the house. So I love excursion narratives. I love probing that line between me and either the natural or the human-built world. And I would say that makes me an eco-writer if I continue to do that. This latest book, Gullies of My People, I go out with a geologist and I visit a bunch of gully sites in the county that were used by soil scientists in the 1930s to discover all they could about the Piedmont, the soils of the Piedmont. And so there were 9 gully sites, and I go out and I explore those with this geologist. So excursion, natural world, man-made world, people-made world. I just love those interactions, those connections between those things.
Is that what inspired you to become a writer in the first place? Was just that, or how would you explain your writer's journey here?
I started as a poet. Early on, I wrote poetry, and then by the time I got to college, that got me really interested in the 70s as an English major and a religion major in contemporary poets. Started reading, took a workshop, started writing, and just became obsessed with contemporary poetry, writing it, reading it. And there was always that element of the natural world in those early poems, even because my best friend was a herpetologist, and we'd get a 6-pack of beer and go out and drive the roads and look for snakes every weekend. You know, when most people were partying down at the road, we were out with our 6-pack of beer, driving the roads up along the mountain front looking for snakes. So those experiences became part of my early poetry. Also, I'm trying to come to terms with my family history, which I return to in this Gullies of My People book. As I mentioned earlier, I don't like bourbon. And the major reason I don't like bourbon is my mother was a really bad alcoholic. And she used to, when she was a binge drinker, not a maintenance drinker. She would be sober for 6 weeks, and then bam, she would get drunk and be drunk for 3 weeks, and then be sober for 9 weeks and get drunk for 4 weeks. And so I never, as a kid, knew when she was going to be drunk. My father had died when I was 5, and so she would drink this really bad, cheap whiskey called Shinley, and she would hide it under the sink. And when I'd come in from school, the first thing I'd do every day is go to the sink. And if there was a little glass turned upside down on the sink, I'd know that she was drinking, and I'd smell that glass, and that sweet rye whiskey smell or corn whiskey smell is something I never forgot. And I to this day, I just don't enjoy, even though I do drink whiskey, I don't enjoy those whiskeys because it reminds me of my mother and those times. So those elements worked into my early poetry as well. And then I began to write prose in the 1980s, mainly magazine pieces. And that's when I developed as a narrative writer. And that's when these books started to form. I published essays. My first book was called Waist Deep, and first prose book was called Weed Time. It was a book of essays about re-inhabiting a little house up in the mountains of North Carolina. And then after that, I had a book of essays called Waist Deep in Black Water, and it was just a series of literary essays that I'd published in journals. But then I got interested in what are the possibilities of narrative length, full-length narratives. And so that's when I got into this whole series. I wrote a book about the Chattooga River. I was a big kayaker too, and canoeist. So I wrote a book about the Chattooga River. I wrote this book, Circling Home. I wrote this book, My Paddle to Sea. I wrote the Hawk book, and I've always been interested in animals, and I wrote a book about coyotes coming into the South.
Okay.
About right before I wrote the hawk book. So,
Sure.
so lots of narratives, all excursion narratives, all narratives where I had this one layer of personal excursion, but then I would always layer it with human and natural history
Sure.
story.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And I think it's I'd mentioned I'm still fascinated with hawks. I just don't watch them as much as I used to.
You know which ones are close to your house, or
so you can find red tails everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just they're red-shouldered hawks you can find around here. Not as often, but pretty reliably. The winter we get a lot of wintering. So I've seen bald eagles because we're right on the foothills. If you know LA area where Pasadena is, like the Rose Parade, the Rose Bowl, we're along the mountains there, the San Gabriel Mountains. We're 15 minutes east.
Oh, wow.
You can get some bald eagles. I've only seen really got to observe, I should say, a golden eagle once, which my wife, they won't even like me telling this story. My two oldest daughters were from a previous relationship, and they went and stayed in Indiana with their mom for the summer. So we go pick them up at Ontario Airport, Ontario, California Airport, which is the Inland Empire for anyone watching. And we pick them up from the airport, and we're driving, getting on the freeway to go home, and there's a golden eagle just up on the foam perch right on the off ramp or the on ramp. And so I pulled over because I'm like, I have to sit and watch this bird now. And they're like, we just got off this plane. You haven't seen us.
Time to go home.
I'm on the side of the freeway watching it, and then it takes off and it flies, and I see where it lands on this electrical pole right off the next exit. So I'm like, oh, awesome. Now we're going to go follow it over there. So I pull up over there, and it lands, and there's a couple red-tailed hawks. It must have been close to the nest because they're just mobbing it. They're just diving it, and you hear them screeching. And for people, I'm sure people that don't know, that eagle sound in movies is actually red-tailed hawks.
Yeah, that's one of the funniest little anecdotes you can tell at a party that people are always interested in. Those eagle sounds you hear? And,
right, yeah. And so they're just going. Right. And I'm there a good half hour watching them. And finally the eagle flew away, and you see them mobbing it. And so I watch it into the distance, and they're like, this has been like a half hour, Dad. Like, we just want to go home, like, eat. I'm like, you got to see a golden eagle. You don't know how cool this is. And they're like, no, you don't know how cool this is, Dad.
I've got a great piece this is Neighborhood Hawks. Oh, this is a great, okay, let's see if I can get it to cover up there. Oh, let's see. There we go.
There it is.
This cover is by the University of Georgia Press. Does great job, great. They're my major publisher, and this cover was by a tattoo artist in Athens, Georgia, and I did an event with him, and he said, "Now I'll do this tattoo if you want it." And I said, "No, thank you." But I mean, incredible.
That is a really cool.
But anyway, I've got a little short piece in here. This book is a series of journal entries because I wrote it on my phone, and it runs through the year. But there's a short piece about when I finally see the hawks making love.
Oh, okay, awesome.
So I'll read that in a second. Yeah.
Okay.
That'd
be great. Right. Well, and I think one of the fascinations for me and probably other people was that sense of wildness of just kind of preternatural nature, like something like more eternal, more long lasting than just our current civilization.
Yeah.
You get that sense. It's like you're in this neighborhood. I'm in the suburbs, and you go and I'll be riding my bike or something and see the other day actually I was picking my son up, and there was a Cooper's hawk kind of flying from tree to tree in this neighborhood, and it just gives you that sense of connecting to something deeper and wilder, and you feel that. And I think I felt that like in my heart, like I felt like, I feel that connection, that wildness, that wanting to break free a little of the establishment here. I think coyotes somewhat too. I
Yeah.
grew up in the desert, so we were sick with coyotes all the time. In fact, I tell the wife and kids that I grew up in Palmdale, which is desert, desert. Where we are now, the coyotes are way more ballsy. I mean, the coyote was in the neighbor's yard, and me and my son-in-law walk outside, and we're both like 6 foot, and the coyote just looked up at us and was saying, well, whatever, I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, man, Palmdale, they used to be skittish.
Yeah.
Neighborhood coyotes, like, they're just doing what they're doing. But it is still that grace in it, especially with the hawks, like grace and getting to see them fly and just maneuver and just alight into a tree. I like it.
Remarkable. Yeah.
To go in. I can see that. Is it what inspired you to do that? To watch them for the year?
Reading that J.A. Baker book and realizing that I had birds of a different sort that were more domestic and were more and we're not quite as wild. Because I had this feeling, Baker, these peregrines would dive from 5,000 feet up and nail this pigeon and eat it right there in front of him and all this stuff.
Right.
And I'm thinking these birds that I want to follow are much more domesticated than these birds in weird way. They nest in my front yard. They stay here all year round. They seem to survive. They're not threatened. And I got really interested in that idea. The idea. I'm very interested in the idea of whether or not what's going to survive this great extinction. I'm very interested in that idea. And everything I read is, either you believe, either you buy sort of the hype that this is a great apocalypse and nothing's going to survive, climate change and the change underway, or you kind of look at it like, well, there've been 5 other great extinctions and things slip through the loophole. I just listened to an amazing podcast on BBC about crocodilians. I'm very interested in alligators and crocodiles. I've got a book about them as well. And I'm interested in how these creatures have been around for 260 million years, and they've survived 2 massive extinctions. They might not survive this one, but they survived 2 before this, and they've been around for, we've been around about 1 million years. I mean, right. As a species, not even that long, but I'm talking about our line, And I'm really fascinated with what is it that's going to make it through to the next level. If it's indeed as in dire as we're told it is, this coming extinction. And I really think coyotes are going to be there. I really do think they're going to make it through it. And I think probably of all the hawks, red shoulders and red tails are going to have a good shot of making it through. Peregrines, probably not, or maybe not. Who knows? But they're definitely going to be beetles and cockroaches. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And things like that. So I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to some of the animals I'm drawn to is just this idea of they've figured out ways to live with us. And we've figured out ways to live with them. I mean, we've been trying to eradicate coyotes for 150 years, and we're not even close. They just okay. I mean, they are everywhere now. One of the reviews of the book when it came out, the coyote book in the Atlanta paper said, if you believe John Lane, there's going to be a coyote next to you in the Walmart pretty soon. I mean, it's the truth, in their parking lot at least.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm
because in real life, the coyote gets the roadrunner. Like
yes. Yeah. So, do you want me to try and find that little piece?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Track it down. Here it is. I found it. Okay. 24 January. Near dawn, the temperature is 54 degrees, like a spring morning. And when I put out the dog, I hear chorus frogs singing their mass metallic love ballad in the bottoms. Did they sing through the night a Woodstock of Frog Love? Do they chart more than temperature? Can they sense the barometer falling slowly as a warm front drifts through from the southwest? They say we get our weather from Atlanta, and this morning they've sent us warm rain, a frog paradise. Far enough away, competing with the wind chimes, the frogs sound now like sleigh bells, or something steady, or some steady hand shaking a jar of steel shavings, a drum machine's ponderous rhythm track. Is this the winter of love, or is it still weeks distant, and this only a tune-up, a one-night stand? Is that yearly orgy right around the corner in this warming world? So that's the frog love. Let me see if I can find the hawk love. Here we go. So this is 3 months later, 2 months later, 3rd of February, 5 of February, 3 p.m. Liftoff. First observation of hawk hanky-panky. About 50 of the voyeur vultures watch from a tower as well. One hawk in the trees to the left comes in crying, "Kier, kier, kier, kier," and lands on a limb. The smaller bird flies in from the right, crying in counterpoint, and lands in a sweet gum nearby. At first I think, my God, they're going to share the same limb. Then the smaller male flies in, lands right on top of the larger female. No sound that I can hear. A couple of wing beats, both birds balanced, more wing beats. Then the smaller male retreats, flies maybe 100 yards and sits on another snag. It's lasted about 5 seconds. There's no steep dives by the male, no soaring upward and calling by the female, no sky dance, as the field guides often describe it. The act is brief, ordinary, and strangely tender. I wish I'd been close enough to hear her, quote, utter short cries before, during, and after copulation, as the field guides claim, but no such luck. I walk from the pavement like a peeping Tom. I watched from the pavement like a peeping Tom. She does not seem embarrassed, though. She sits preening on the branch and looks toward me as her male retreats up the river. So then the funniest thing happened. During the pandemic, we have a fire pit out to the side. This book was like 2 years pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, we're all out at our fire pit. I'm sitting there with my wife and we're drinking a beer one afternoon, and the birds land on a limb 25 feet from us and copy. and my wife says, you had to go all the way down the street and you had to go every day. And here we are just sitting here, and suddenly they land in the same thing right there in the yard. So
right.
It's pretty cool.
Right. Did you get to hear the female hawk's cries at that time? Or is the field guides
I
just,
did.
you know,
Yeah. That time they
that
were
time.
close enough. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. That was brilliant. I really loved the was it the froggy Woodstock? I forget the exact phraseology
Froggy
and how
Woodstock,
yeah, and the turkey vultures being voyeurs up there and you being a peeping Tom. And then the birds just be like, this is what we do.
It was great. That year, I've had so many moments because the birds are still here. And I've had so many moments where I wonder, do they miss me? Do they miss the attention that I gave them for that year? Because I was obsessed for a year, and now I walk out and they'll catch my attention, but they don't have it the way. And that's one of the sad things about writing. You get obsessed with something and then you pass on to the next project, and the obsession goes away.
Sure. Yeah, you pass it along to someone else,
Yeah.
I said I had a good year or two where I was super obsessed, and then now I like you. I like to. I still, if I see him, I'm still excited. I still watch him for a few seconds, but I don't go out, hunting them. Not that I was ever actually hunting them, but
Right.
I
Well, you
don't
were
go
with
out,
your
searching.
with your observation, your attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, no, thank you for that. So is your I know in that one you said you wrote the first draft basically all on your phone. So I imagine
Yeah.
you're just out writing on your phone, watching the
Yeah.
hawks. Is that generally how you write these books? Is it out while you're on the excursion, or
I always
does it vary?
I always have notebooks. I have over here on the wall, I have 150 journals and notebooks that go back, 25 years. I always carry notebooks, but more and more recently, I've started using the notes function of my phone.
Sure.
I've gotten really good with one finger. I don't type with thumbs. I just like one
Uh-huh.
finger, and and um, and it just works really well for me. My fiction, obviously, I write right here at a computer. I don't write longhand. I do keep a longhand journal, so a lot of my poems end up as first drafts in that longhand in my journal. But
Sure.
the phone has become really, really important to me. Um, I, um, I write on it. I do a lot of research on it.
Sure.
I keep notes on it. I've got 1,700 notes on my iPhone that are also backed up
Hmm.
in the cloud.
Right.
It's really important to me. Are you a writer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or do you use your phone a lot?
I do. I do. I do. The notes very similarly.
Yeah,
A lot of the notes, the things, ideas, and things that I have as I go. I used to have
really
little
great.
leather notebooks, and then I would always need to then, for one, read my writing, which back then I was pretty good at. Now I'm not so sure I'm good at it anymore. But then
Yeah,
I'd have to transpose that onto a page, and so writing it there so that I'll email it to myself, or it'll just download on the computer now. Then I can, because a lot of times what I'll have is I'll just have a burst of inspiration for a little passage, and
yeah,
I'll write that, and that'll be the first draft for that, and I can just pop it right into the piece I'm working on. So
yeah. I
it's
think the phone is.
it's nice.
I get really mad when people kind of roll their eyes when I tell them I wrote a book on an iPhone. I go, you just don't get it.
Right, right.
How remarkable this technology is, and
Oh yeah.
it's very helpful to me.
Sure. Well, we call it a phone, I think, because of the history of it. It's really just a computer you have in your pocket that has a phone app on it. I mean, most people probably use the phone app much less than the
Oh
internet
yeah,
app and
for
everything
sure.
else, right? So the social media apps, whatever you're doing on it, the phone is kind of secondary. But so I don't think there's any reason not to. I try to make technology work for me.
Yeah, me
So
too.
it's what's best way to, you know, I know people like to talk about AI as kind of a hot button thing, especially with the writer's strike in Hollywood. It's AI is taking the jobs, or it can't be copyrighted and things. I would never write anything with AI, because it's way more personal to me. So the idea of going through a computer to do it is a little silly. But I can see, because I've also worked, my sordid corporate career, I was a director for a quality regulatory department,
Yeah,
companies that make medical devices and things. And to be able to go analyze data to find trends, my wife's a nurse, to be able to look at all of that data and get trends, I can absolutely see how artificial intelligence could be used to remarkable results, to look through that and go, oh no, these are actually the 5 questions you want to ask,
oh yeah,
to
oh
figure
yeah.
out if someone has a heart attack or whatever it might be. To where that might take a person years, and you might be able to use artificial intelligence and direct it at that, and get that answer in
I
minutes.
agree 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. But to do it for art, and to me,
Yeah,
I
there will
look at writing
always
as an
be
art.
art.
It's
The truth
right.
is that, like, I have a friend, a great friend who's a screenwriter, and we talk about this all the time. And he's a real artsy fartsy screenwriter. I mean, he makes a lot of money, but he's always trying to write these crazy scripts that um, are not going to get made. But he'll convince
Hmm.
somebody to give him some
Sure.
money to work on this. But anyway, he says, the truth is that 85% of the scripts could be written by AI. I mean, they're just not that interesting, and it's a
Right.
formula.
Sure.
It's a formula, but he says there's
Right.
always going to be that 5 to 10% of scripts that are impossible to come up with AI.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
That's going to put a lot
if
of
you
people
really
out. That's
look,
going to put a lot of hacks out of business. Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I think that's the real danger, because if you're the person in charge for writing the new Star Wars or Marvel, right? These things that
Marvel
are just
Comics.
iterative. Yeah. I mean,
You're
and
in
they are
trouble.
literally iterative.
You're in deep trouble.
You're in deep trouble. Yeah. Or the new Indiana Jones, right? All these things. It's like, well, sure, like, you're just kind of being a human AI, right? Just iterative, going
I think
through.
the future is really going to show us what makes us human.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And that's
going to
something I don't
surprise a lot
think
of
AI
people.
will ever help. Sure.
Will AI make good Irish whiskey,
I know. I don't believe that one. Well, we'll see. If it does, I'll be there to sip it occasionally, begrudgingly. The robots have won. Going back though, so I think that's an interesting question, like what makes us human things. Did you learn anything about maybe that more generally, like what makes us human, but also about yourself and your time with the Hawks? And maybe even, I know, I want to transition here in a minute over to My Paddle to the Sea.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll stay in Hawks and then we can transition over the next question.
Anything about my... Ask me that again. Ask me the question again.
So as you watched those Hawks, did you learn anything about yourself in particular? Did you learn anything about kind of what it means to be human? And
well, it was interesting. There's a question in the book that never gets answered, and my wife asked it. She asked, "Why is it that your heart goes out so fully to wild animals?"
Sure.
And I played with that through the book, and I try to answer it, but I never answered it because I don't know the answer to that. But I have a soft heart for anything wild. I get very emotional about roadkill. I can't abstract it. I can't stop seeing it. Actually, Betsy, my wife, says that I'm the only person she could imagine meeting who can identify almost every snake and dead animal at 55 miles an hour on the road. I see them and I give them a name. And I have this little prayer that I say. James Dickey's one of my favorite old poets, and he had a poem called "The Last Wolverine," in which in the 60s he imagined the wolverine would end up going extinct. He was wrong, thank goodness. But the last line of the poem is, the wolverine says, "Lord, let me die, but not die out." And when I pass a dead animal on the road, I raise. It's gotten to be a point now where I don't have to say it. I just by raising the hand, I know I've said it. But I used to say, "Lord, let you die, but not die out." So what I mean by that is, if I see a dead white-tailed deer on the road, I'm sad that this individual deer has died, but that species ain't going away. I mean, or coyotes, but if I was to see a whooping crane on the side of the road, I'd be a little sadder because that's one dead individual that makes a big difference. Whereas a dead individual, white-tailed deer can be sad, but it's not going to make a big difference to the population. So, Lord, let me die, but not die out. And so I guess I learned writing the book about the Hawks that there's some unanswered questions about my own feelings that I don't know the answers to. And that even trying to explore it for a year and trying to figure out why it is that I'm drawn out of my house to find these birds every time I hear them. Why did I do that? Why does my heart go out? The original title of this book that Georgia nixed was Heart to the Hawks. Heart to the Hawks. And they said, Neighborhood Hawks is, and they were right, but Neighborhood Hawks is a much better title. And that comes from a poem by Robinson Jeffers, a California poet from the 1930s. he had a book called Give Your Heart to the Hawks. And so my book was going to be called Heart to the Hawks.
Sure.
And I still like that title, but maybe I can get
it's more poetic, but
and put it on there and put it around the book. But
I
Neighborhood
know.
Hawks is a better book for selling.
Sure. Sure. Well, you get the tattoo artist to stop by, give you the tattoo, and then
Heart
above
to the
it, he
Hawks.
writes "Heart to the
Yeah.
Hawks." Yeah, there you go.
So I'd say that was the unanswered, or the question, or the thing that I learned.
Sure.
Is that I had unanswered questions about myself and animals.
Right. Right. No, I think that's, I mean, it's beautiful for one. I mean, that you do that and your connection to the wild, the wild world. I think it's also, it's when you are introspective and you do examine yourself, you realize it's kind of an unsolving mystery. I feel like the ground's always shifting for one. It's like, you're not a stagnant thing. You're changing. It's like, right. You look at a mountain and you think, oh, that mountain that will be here forever, but the mountains change. There's erosion, there's fires, there's all these things that happen. And it's, as you look inward, you realize, yeah, there's all these mysteries. And just like when you look outwards, it's just, we're surrounded by mystery as much as we think we can Google something and have the answer. It's no, there's that, like subatomic particles principle, right? Is that they're not stable until you observe them. We're kind of that way. We might be stable for a moment, but then things change and you realize, is that stability even at that moment even real? Is it My Paddle to the Sea? Could you maybe give us a little bit of the background on that book? And
so when we moved into this house, first I wrote this book called Circling Home, where I explored and one of the major features of the circle is this, in many places they call it a river, but we call it a creek here. It's probably, 40, 50 feet wide. And I knew from just knowing the area that after about 5 miles, there was a confluence with another larger river. And then that river flowed for another 20 miles and another larger river. And then that river flowed another 80 miles and then another larger river. And then that river flowed to the ocean. And so I started thinking about, wow, that'd be a great book. Just put in behind my house, take my canoe or kayak and put in behind my house. I thought originally I was going to do it by myself, just going to do it as this great sort of Thoreauvian journey. So I started planning it. I got the boat, started planning it, started getting all my maps together and getting all my gear. And then we went to Central America to go on a paddling trip with our family, my 2 sons and my wife. We were all paddlers. And we went down there and we booked this guy to take us out on rivers of Costa Rica for a week. We were going to paddle 5 rivers in 7 days. And on the 3rd river, this was over Christmas, we were on a trip where 2 people died.
Oh, wow.
And it was devastating. And when I got back, I asked myself, do you really ever want to go on a river again? I mean, this was a horrible experience. And so the book starts out with me telling the story of what happened to us in Costa Rica, and how these people died on our river trip. And then I decide I am going to do this. I'm going to get back in the saddle. I'm going to paddle to the coast, but I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to do it with 2 friends. One friend's going to take me or go with me in a canoe half the trip, and then the other friend's going to tag team, and one friend's going to go turkey hunting, and the other guy's going to get in the boat and paddle the rest of the way to the ocean with me. And so then, unbeknownst to us, one of the wettest periods the state's known for years happens, and the rivers are all incredibly flooded like they were on the trip in Costa Rica. And so I'm having all these flashbacks about this. I mean, there weren't the rapids that were in Costa Rica, but it was still pretty crazy. We had to portage 9 dams and things like that. And so I end up making it to the ocean and getting home, and it took 11 days, and it's a great adventure. And it got me back on rivers, and I've continued to paddle ever since. So that was kind of the focus of that book.
Sure. And I think it was one of it might have been in the description. I think it might have been from Booklist describing it, but they said it kind of reaffirms the value of sitting and observing. Would you
Yes.
agree with that? And then if you do,
Yes.
could you describe what the value is to that?
Well, the value, I mean, I saw the rivers for the first time. I was able to see what value they had for our state, how the state valued them. There were places along the rivers where I saw that people were violating every law they could to get rid of trash or do this or do that. And so it brought me into contact. It's that famous Thoreau quote, contact, contact, where he's climbed to the top of Mount Katahdin and the actual world, contact, contact. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of me just discovering what contact meant, what it meant to be in contact with the natural world. After I did that, I had some students decide they wanted to do the same thing with their capstone for environmental studies. And I knew I'd succeeded when about halfway through the trip, they sent me a photograph and they were all looking at the camera saying, contact, contact. so it was a success. But when you're in a boat for 8 hours a day in a seat, you notice things. You notice things. You can't, for one thing, time takes on a new dimension. I think that's what I took away from that trip.
Sure. Well, that's interesting because, rivers are so throughout time kind of symbolic of time, right? We think of time as flowing and things, but rivers don't flow at a steady, 60 seconds is a minute pace. So, it's
we had one day we paddled 44 miles because the rivers were so swollen with the floodwaters that we were just like downstream.
Yeah. Was there ever any moments during that trip, or maybe your many adventures in the wild here? Was there any moments where you felt in danger or any harrowing experiences?
Oh yeah, the trip in Costa Rica. We could have died just as easily as these two people in the boats with us died. That was a terrible, terrible moment, and it was completely unexpected. This guy who was our guide on this trip was one of the most admired outfitters in Costa Rica, and he just there was just I'm not going to say he made a mistake because it was just the circumstances were different than he expected that day, and a raft flipped and two people swam, and a raft full of people swam, and two of them died, but we were right behind them in the raft behind them, and our raft didn't flip, and so we were able to make it through. But that's probably the time that I'll look back on for the rest of my life and think about what could have happened to me. Yeah.
Sure.
But I took students once. I've never really written about this. I wrote some journal entries about it that appeared in a book. But I took students once on a river in Mexico on a 12-day river trip. Wofford students, over January, and the trip is the Usumacinta River. It's a river called the River of Ruins, where there were 6 Mayan sites you could get to by river, but you could only see them by river, so you had to float to them. And the trip after we were there, Guatemalan rebels killed 3 people on a river trip. So they closed the river down for 5 years after that. And we had the rebels visit us on that trip. They walked out of the woods with their AK-47s and checked our passports and talked with us, and then walked back into the jungle. But the next trip with the same outfitter, they walked out of the woods, shot 2 tourists, and walked back into the jungle.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
wow,
so that was pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's terrifying to think of. Like, now we're going to shoot you, or now, and that's kind of life, right? It's your raft flips, the other person's doesn't. It's scary, but it's part of the deal here for us.
But I knew from that I didn't want to be that kind of adventure journalist. I didn't want to seek out this sort of adventure.
Sure. Yeah.
It
There's
sought me
that.
out. I didn't want to seek it out.
Right. Right. Well, there's that famous book Into the Wild.
Yeah, I taught it many
And that,
times.
yeah, and then he goes out and wait,
Crystal
no,
Canvas.
is that the one where he goes in? I might be getting the title mixed up. Is that the one where he goes to Alaska and
Yes, yes.
yes, okay. Yeah, and he's like, I'm having my great Alaska adventure and changing my name and everything. And I don't want to completely spoil it. It's been out for a long time, but it
Yep.
doesn't end so well for him. But there is that, like, I would love to go to Alaska, but I'm not so sure I need to go live off the grid and things.
No, no, I'm what are they?
Quite
They've got
there.
a name for that now. Curated. I'm happy to be more of a curated tour or
Sure.
curated visit than that. I've done my share of that. There's enough of
Uh-huh.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, and you mentioned you were fascinated with the idea of what survives, right? If
Yes,
we are
yes.
indeed on the precipice of another mass extinction here, what continues on. This might be a off the park question here, but I'm a little kooky in the head. But I'm often semi-related to that, and that's what made me think of it, is that I've often thought there's probably more to human history than just the story we have now.
Yeah.
And then they keep finding things like, I think it's Göbekli Tepe. I butchered that name, but in Turkey, it's a site that's much older with
Yeah.
megaliths than we would have ever thought. Do
I remember
you,
that.
yeah, um, do you ever think about that? Do you have any thoughts
Oh
about like
yeah. Oh yeah. Just that blog podcast I was listening to today about crocodiles. They were talking about how incomplete the fossil record is and how there's all of these discoveries that are to be made about the crocs in the Triassic and the Jurassic. And I think there's no doubt, that we're going to have dramatic discoveries about human prehistory.
sure.
I don't know what they're going to be, but they're going to be there. I think you're right.
And so then, before we transition to Gullies here, I like to make sure I ask every author for the writers that watch the show. Um, Anyone starting out their kind of author journey here, their writing journey here, you have any advice? Anything you wish now, you wish you had learned earlier?
Oh, I mean, everybody says read, and that's getting more and more rare because I think people,
Sure.
think people are still reading, but read outside of the period we're in now. Read, or that's my biggest advice is
Sure.
don't just read the books that are the popular books today on the popular subjects.
Right.
Read, if you're a poet, go back and read the poets from the 50s. Read your contemporaries. A
Mhm.
poet, teacher of mine used to always say, Donald Hall used to always say, read. If you read your contemporaries, it's like swimming in a shallow pool. Swim in the ocean where there are sharks like Keats and Dickinson.
Right.
People
Sure.
that are so much better than you're ever going to be, likely. When you're reading your contemporaries and you're comparing yourself to the person who's on the New York Times list or who's got a contract with Doubleday, do that, but make sure you go back and say, wow, who are some of these folks that were on the National Book Award finalist list in 1973 I've never heard of, and find those books. So
Yeah.
read, but don't read in a narrow little column.
Sure.
I think that's happening more and more now.
Yeah. A
Particularly
lot of.
with political correctness and things like that.
Mhm.
People are feeling like, well, I can't read Dickinson because he was a colonial,
Mhm.
but realize that he was a colonial, but go back and read him anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And
Accept
realize at
that.
some point in
The
the
best
history they're
person
going to
on
call
that
us
right
something.
now. The best person on that right now, her essays, is the Black British writer Zadie Smith. She's got the best position on that of anybody out. Her position is be aware, be conscious of how awful this was in the past and how awful the past was, but don't not read anybody because they were a racist or a colonial or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
So that would be my biggest piece of advice. Read, and don't censor your reading.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's great advice in general too. Like I think we get into these bubbles, break your bubbles, like
mine says read right. See, read right sound.
Oh, I see it. Very good. Awesome. So then maybe we can transition over and talk about Gullies a bit here. So I haven't had the opportunity because it's not quite out yet at the time of that we're recording this. So maybe you can give us a little more background on the story.
Yeah. So my best friend, one of my best friends in Spartanburg, is a geologist, archaeologist, and he discovered a lot of work that was done in Spartanburg County in the 1930s by PhDs from all over the country on gullies and geology in the Piedmont. And because of the war, this was in like 32 to 41. Because of the war, it all came to a halt, and none of the work was published. And he found it all in the Library of Congress and in a local library. And then he started going out in the field, and he realized that the pipes they put in and things like that were still there, and he could actually go back and recreate their work based on from 75 years ago. And he also found a field trip that had been put together by these scientists where they went to about 4 or 5 gullies in the county and talked about their work. And so I got interested in that and told him I'd be a bus driver on his field trip. And so one half of this book is me visiting all of these gullies with this field trip. The group was called the Friends of the Pleistocene. And I was the bus driver for it. And so there's that narrative. And then the other narrative is my family's story in this county of being poor tenant farming people that were actually gullying the land in the 1930s. And I weave these two narratives together, my own experience with my own education with geology and my friendship with Terry and my visit with these gullies. And then I go with my sister to all these family sites, and she gives me the stories of my family.
Right. Yeah, that's lovely.
What did you read a little bit of it?
So actually we do, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit and then we'll get to it. We also have a very special segment of the show. It's just rapid fire questions I like to call shots, that you're expected to do a shot every question. No, I'm kidding. But we'll come to gullies here in a minute. I wanted to ask though, so you're writing it. For one, I think gullies is such a beautiful symbol. Beautiful, maybe not the perfect word here, but it's powerful. Metaphor. Was that just, what is that when it comes to your family? How does that metaphor kind of?
The gullies are real clear for me and my family. I come from poverty, and poverty is a gully. I come from tragedy. My mother had this alcoholic past and had a tragic life in many ways. She was very upbeat and wonderful, and she ended up beating her alcoholism and being sober the last 25 years of her life. But there's that, and then my father committed suicide when I was 5. There's that, and so those. Through the book, I constantly am thinking about, how did these erosions, these gullies affect me? And how did I climb out of those gullies and get this middle-class life that I have, college professor for 32 years. And so the metaphor translates in that way.
Sure. What did you learn about your family while you're going through? I know your sister was telling you the stories. Was there anything you learned that?
I learned how resilient they were in order to end up where we are now. The resilience was of my mother, of my entire family. I mean, just incredible resilience.
Sure. Yeah. Did you learn anything about your sister in particular going through that?
Oh yeah,
with her?
I learned how much I love her. I loved her before, but I learned just how smart she is. She's a genealogist. and I'd never really explored that with her, and how much she knew about the family, and how systematic she was about it, and how persistent she was to find out these answers to these questions. I was much more interested in just the stories, but she wanted to know the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned how good she was at it.
From the technical writing standpoint of it, right? I have lots of writers on here, and they talk about they want setting to be a character in itself, and then you have character and theme and these things. But the way you describe like your writing so far today, it almost seems more like instead of one feeding into the other and playing off the other one, they're just all kind of interwoven, right? That goalie in the ground is a goalie in the ground that happened. It's also the goalie of your family experience, goalie kind of in the soul experience to some degree. Is that an intentional thing, or is that just natural? Or
I would not say there's a lot of intentionality in my work. I'm a very organic writer, and I rewrite a lot, and things come up in the rewriting that I did not. Like one thing I did with this book that I've never done before is once I had a draft of the book, I did word searches in the book, and I would anytime I mentioned something, I would copy and paste that into into a file, and I'll have this series of files like the word story. How many times does the word story come up in this manuscript? And then I would read through, and then I would think about, well, is this a good progression through the book? Does this actually do what I want story and narrative to do in this book? Or my mother, every place my mother came up in the book. And I spent a lot of time, more than ever before, organizing the manuscript around flows through the book. And I don't know whether that made any difference or not, but I really enjoyed being a little more systematic about it in that way. Yeah.
Sure.
But I'd say mostly I'm more of an organic writer.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's before we get to the reading here, I like to go, like I mentioned, I like to have a little section. I call it shots because we keep it drinking themed. And it's just kind of rapid fire your first response to it. So, first question here: what is the best excuse a student has ever given you?
Oh man, God, this can be hard. Best excuse a student has ever given me. God, I've never gotten the dog ate my homework. I can't think of an excuse I've gotten from a student. No. Here it is. The best excuse a student ever gave me. I'm sorry. I just can't get up for your class, and my class was at 2:30 in the afternoon.
So I have to do full disclosure here. My first job, I worked at Domino's Pizza. So, pizza hours are usually in the evening, right? When most people are ordering pizzas. And there was so this is 17, 18. But so I had a shift. I think I started at 5, and I was just up the entire night before. I've always had insomnia really bad as well, but so that didn't help. But then also just being 19 and being out partying all night, didn't help. And 4 o'clock hits, and I need to get up for work, and I just can't. And so I called in sick for a 5 o'clock.
Oh man, you'd have been that student. Yeah. I can't.
I apologize for missing your class.
I just can't get up for your class. My class is at 2:30 in the afternoon. All right.
So that might answer the next question.
That wasn't fast, but it was finally got there. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That might answer the next question too, which was, what is the worst excuse? So it might be the best and worst all in one.
Yeah, those are both best and worst.
Have you ever encountered a Bigfoot, hairy man, or anything you couldn't explain while in the wild?
Well, I had a UFO experience in Wyoming in 1990, and I never have been able to explain that. So so a person, no, but lights in the sky, yes.
Sure. Yeah. So what happened with that one?
I was on top of a mountain in Wyoming in middle of the night with a bunch of people, and this light just appeared, and then these lights popping around it like lightning bugs, and then suddenly they went in a straight line, and there was a big light, and then these lights beside it, and they stayed like that for a while, and then just they were gone. And I never explained that, never understood what had happened.
Have you ever had any experiences with poison oak or poison ivy?
I'm not allergic to either one of them. I can work out in the yard with no gloves and shorts on and wade through it, and
Well,
no problem.
Yeah, you are magic. We went. So I was born in West Virginia, and I was born in Morgantown, West Virginia. But I had never been, quote unquote. I mean, I'd virtually been there, but I mean, I'd physically been there as a baby. But my dad was going to WVU. We left and had never been back. So this past summer, we were going out to visit family, and I'm like, oh, I want to go, visit, Morgantown, kind of be the first time I'd been where I was born and that I can remember. And we rented an Airbnb, had this hammock, and I've never, I don't sit on hammocks much. And it's right on the edge of the forest, and there's a little hill there. So I'm going to get into it. And my she's filming me because she's like anticipating something comical happening. And I try to sit on the hammock. It, of course, spins over, flips me out, and sends me like skidding down the hill. And she got a video. I'll put it at the end of the show just for anyone that wants to laugh at me. But the downside of it, because it wasn't a big deal, it didn't hurt, but it's right on the edge of the forest where the poison oak was, and I got it on the back in my lower back. And we get home, and I have this rash, and I had started a new medication and things. I'm like, is it that? Is it? And finally, I realized, because I've had poison oak, poison ivy things before. It's been a long time, thankfully, but I've had it before, and I'm like, oh, I know, I think it's poison oak. What did I do? And then my niece was like, it's when you flipped in the hammock. And I'm like, oh, it is when I flipped in the hammock. And so then I had a rash for like a week. So you're magical that you can.
That's great.
It doesn't bother you at all. So awesome. So that will do our shots portion of the program here. And if you like, maybe we could get straight to the reading of Gullies now.
Yeah, let's read just a paragraph. Just as the preface. There's a preface. The preface is called "My Past as a Gully," and it goes like this. Okay, I'm reading off my PDF here. The book's going to be out in about a month. Leaving the house was one of my earliest forms of therapy. Motion proved to be a geographical self-medication. Once I discovered my love for the outside, that love saved me. There was plenty of trouble in my immediate family, and I often needed to escape. Spartanburg is a mid-sized South Carolina city in the upper Piedmont, a region of low rolling hills and flashy streams. The physiographic province extends between the mountains and the ocean, from New York to Alabama. And even though it is urbanized and suburbanized in many areas, the landscape still offers plenty of grown over and neglected space to slip away. As a child, I didn't call it the Piedmont. The name would come later when I understood the physical world enough to know how it's organized and studied by earth scientists based on surface topography and underlying geology. I find great satisfaction in reviewing the forces that made the land, the patterns and processes. What has mattered always is getting out into the fields and woods and not letting my home life cave in and cover me. I discovered Dead Horse Canyon in my neighborhood, wandering, and years later I learned how the place got its name, as a boneyard for local livestock, carcasses hauled in from pastures to rot in the gully. By the time I discovered my way there, Dead Horse Canyon was just a name. The flesh fed generations of buzzards, the bones gnawed to dust by wild dogs and mice. Whatever else Dead Horse Canyon was, that magic depression, that shady retreat in hard level earth, read from near the surface downward, was an open door into the landscape. I routinely wandered out and ran across a pasture that today is lined with houses. I entered the distant hardwoods and acres of bamboo, and somewhere beyond that gully portal, I always found sanctuary. And then I go into a long section where I'm sort of describing what the place meant to me. So that's sort of where I'm going with it. You know, it's kind of a combination of landscape description and me exploring my own interior landscape.
Right. Kind of interior landscape. Sure. Yeah, that's lovely. And you know what it made me think of, especially that first paragraph here, is when you said the land has saved you. Like going, I may be paraphrasing poorly, but um, it it's such a simple thing, and a lot of times we say it's like a hippie thing or something, but that idea of love saving you,
Yeah.
like it's almost universal. It's find what you love, and that will get you out of wherever you are. Yeah, if your love is football, if your love is, nature, whatever it is, if you find that and devote your time to that,
It'll get you
you'll
through.
save yourself. It'll get you there. And yeah, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to reading it when it comes out here. I guess that brings us to what I like to call on the show last call. You don't have to go home, but you'll have to restart the video. So I liked my last question I like to ask everyone here before we get to some odds and ends, like where people can go to find you and your books, is one piece of just kind of like a life hack, some life advice. Like what's one thing our viewers can do? It can be small, big, wherever you want to take it, but what's one thing they can do that if they started doing tomorrow can just make their life a little bit better?
I think set up a daily walk. One of my favorite books that was really important to me when I wrote Circling Home was a book by a woman in Wyoming named Mary Back, who wrote a book called 7.5 Miles from Home. And she was told in her 60s that she was going to live no more than 5 more years unless she set up a daily exercise routine. So what she did, she lived in the Wind River range of Wyoming. And what she did is she set up these 7.5 mile walks out from her house she had a different one every day, half mile out, half mile back. And she did them religiously. And then she wrote a book about what she saw over the course of a year on these walks. And I think that can change anybody's life, is to set up a routine, a ritual of a walk that you do every day. Do the same one, and don't wear headphones. Don't pay attention to what's around you on those walks, and that can change your life.
Sure. Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, and I think that's a good tip about the no headphones, because I like to ride my bike, and that's kind of my ritual. That's my walk, kind of. I get out, and I don't like to be on the streets, so I'll do neighborhoods, but I don't really like the big streets, or and I'll get into the mountains some, or I'll take mountain roads up. And for a brief period, I started putting headphones in, and I realized it wasn't as therapeutic for me. It wasn't like I usually have tons of ideas. I'll have to stop and kind of write things down for the book I'm working on or the next story I want to write. And that started to kind of dry up. And I noticed like, oh, I don't get home feeling really relaxed and at ease, and my mind's not bursting. I haven't observed everything. It's that distraction is a little too much. So I don't throw them in anymore. So
I think it's tough for people because what happens to you is not very dramatic. I mean, what you see usually is not very dramatic. It's punctuated. There'll be long periods when you're walking when you don't notice anything, and then you notice something. But if you have the headphones on, you never have that single moment where you notice something.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it's lovely. So if people do want to learn more about you, what's the best place for them to go?
Well, I used to have a website, and I let it lapse, so I don't have that anymore. I would say the University of Georgia Press site has all my books on there, and I would say that's probably the best place to go right now. Although I do have a Instagram. Twitter account. I guess it's called X now, but it's under Kudzu Telegraph.
Okay.
Kudzu Telegraph is what my address is with that. So
okay,
2 things I would look for. I got to get a new.
Awesome.
I got to get a new website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hard because you get most people just go on social media for those things anyway. So I have the website and all kinds of the show will be on there and all linked. But then most people that watch it will just go to YouTube
But
and
social
watch the
media.
show, right? And
Yeah.
wherever it is. So yeah, it's tough. But I'll link them with the show here, so
Okay.
anyone watching go to the description,
Good.
and I'll have a link for your Twitter handle and the University of Georgia Press,
Yeah.
for them to readily find you. So thanks again so much for
Yeah.
coming on. It was a real honor to get a chance to meet you and spend the
Yeah.
time
It's great talking with you.
And
Great
yeah.
talking with you, Bill. And I enjoyed drinking a little whiskey with you. And now I'm going to go eat some dinner.
Actually, you should, as I will be here too. So cheers, my friend, and
Cheers.
we'll be talking.
Hey, Stuart, what are you doing? Okay. Okay. Don't fall backwards.
I'm not gonna fall down the hill.
Okay. Is that like the other side, like a little ditch?
And I am gonna fall down. Just recorded that you.
I love you.
So now I'm gonna get my milkshake and drink. And have enjoyed that.